My husband threatened to leave me and our baby after I asked for help. Then he tried to force me into a decision that would change everything. I've been married to my husband for 11 years. He's in the military, and we've moved countless times, setting up new homes and routines each time. Over the years, I've taken on pretty much everything in the house: cooking, cleaning, laundry, groceries. He's handled the occasional lawn mowing or hanging pictures, but that's about it. For most of our marriage, I worked too. I used to ask for help with chores, but every time I brought it up, it went nowhere. Once, he even laughed and said he'd just eat off paper plates and order fast food so I wouldn't have to worry about his dishes. I let it go. Then came our baby. Our 13-month-old is the light of my life, but since her birth, I've been staying home, and the load on me has only grown heavier. I handle it all: the baby's meals, baths, laundry, diapers, feeding during the night, plus all the usual cooking and cleaning. I'm exhausted. Burnt out. So, I brought it up again: can he help, just a little? His response hit me like a wall: he works, isn't that enough? Doesn't that count as doing his part? I tried to explain. I told him I felt like I was drowning, like I was doing everything alone. And I said something I'd never said before: why are we even married if this is how it's going to be? If I have to do it all by myself anyway, I might as well actually be by myself. That got his attention. For the first time in years, he reluctantly agreed to help. It felt like a win, until it didn't. The following week, every small thing he did came with a comment. If he fed the baby, I'd hear, "Hope this is enough." If he changed a diaper, "Am I doing enough yet?" One day, we went grocery shopping. I got the baby out of the car seat and walked around to grab a few bags. He stopped me. "No, I've got it," he said. I told him I could help, but he insisted. As we walked inside, him carrying all the bags, he muttered, "Hope breaking my back is enough for you." I felt the tears sting my eyes. It wasn't help, it was punishment. I finally confronted him. I told him how this wasn't about the chores anymore, it was about how he made me feel for asking for a partnership in our marriage. I told him I felt like I couldn't win. And then, in the heat of the moment, I mentioned divorce. What he said next floored me. If we divorce, I won't be involved in our child's life. It's all or nothing. Those were his exact words. I froze. The idea that he could just opt out of being a father broke something in me. He said he doesn't want a divorce, but his words felt like a threat: stay in this marriage, or our baby loses her dad. Now I'm stuck. We're living overseas, far from family, and I don't know what to do. If I leave, I'd move back to the States with our baby and start over near my family. But if I stay, this is my life. Forever. I feel like I'm choosing between my own sanity and my baby having a relationship with her father. Is it selfish to want a better life for myself? Am I asking for too much? Update 1. After everything that happened, I decided I needed to take a step back and really think about where my life was headed. The tipping point came a few days after our last argument when my husband came home from work acting as if nothing had happened. No apologies, no acknowledgement, just normal. Meanwhile, I was still carrying the weight of everything: resentment, exhaustion, and this gnawing feeling that I couldn't keep living like this. The first thing I did was reach out to a therapist. I wasn't sure if I needed individual therapy, couples therapy, or both, but I knew I needed someone to help me untangle all the emotions I was feeling. I managed to book an online session during the baby's nap time. When I started explaining my situation, the therapist's face shifted from neutral to concerned. She said something that stuck with me: burnout isn't just physical, it's emotional too. If your needs aren't being met, that's a recipe for long-term resentment. I felt seen for the first time in months. With her guidance, I decided to lay everything out for my husband. No threats, no ultimatums, just honesty. That night, after the baby was asleep, I sat him down and told him I had started therapy. His response? A flat, "Good for you." Not the reaction I hoped for, but I pressed on. I explained how I felt, how the lack of partnership was crushing me, and how his dismissive attitude when I asked for help only made it worse. I told him that if things didn't change, I couldn't see myself staying in this marriage, not because I didn't love him, but because I couldn't keep sacrificing myself. He stared at me for what felt like forever before finally saying, "I go to work every day so you don't have to. Isn't that enough?" That sentence was a punch to the gut. I told him that working outside the home doesn't negate the work I do inside the home, and that it's not a competition. We're supposed to be a team. His response? "You chose this life." I think my heart broke a little right there. I didn't choose this. I chose us. I chose a partnership, not a one-sided arrangement where I'm treated like an unpaid employee. I told him that if he really believed that, then we needed to rethink everything. He got defensive, saying I was overreacting and making him feel like a failure. He accused me of trying to ruin our family over a few dishes. At this point, I realized I wasn't getting through to him. Every time I tried to talk, it turned into him feeling attacked and me feeling dismissed. So I dropped it, for now. But internally, I was already thinking about my options. The next day, I started quietly gathering information. I looked into what a divorce would mean while living overseas, what my rights were, and how custody might work. It was overwhelming, to say the least. Meanwhile, his behavior didn't improve. If anything, it got worse. Every small thing he did came with a comment. "Hope you're happy," when he washed a dish. "Guess I'm a housekeeper now," when he fed the baby. It wasn't helping, it was petty and exhausting. I started dreading being around him because everything felt like a minefield. I couldn't ask for help without bracing for some snide remark, and I couldn't do everything myself without collapsing from burnout. Then, one night, the baby woke up crying. I was beyond exhausted, so I asked him to go check on her. He groaned, rolled over, and said, "You're better at that stuff." I snapped. I told him I wasn't asking, I was telling him to get up and take care of his child. He stormed off, muttering under his breath, but he went. I sat there in the dark, wondering how it had come to this. How had we gone from being partners to this toxic, unbalanced mess? The next day, I made a decision. I stopped waiting for him to step up and started taking control of my own life. I made a list of what I needed to do to feel like myself again. At the top of that list was regaining some independence. I reached out to a friend back in the States who had been offering me a remote job for months, and I accepted. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was enough to give me a sense of purpose, and maybe a way out, if it came to that. I didn't tell him right away. I wanted to see if I could juggle the work with everything else first. To my surprise, having something that was just mine gave me a small spark of energy. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't just existing, I was living. I worked during nap times and after the baby went to bed. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Of course, he noticed. One night, he asked me why I seemed less stressed lately. I debated whether to tell him but decided to be honest. I told him about the job and how it was helping me feel like a person again. His reaction was mixed. On one hand, he was happy for me. On the other hand, he immediately jumped to, "Does this mean you're going to stop nagging me now?" I didn't even respond. I just stared at him, wondering how someone who once promised to be my partner could say something so thoughtless. Things came to a head a week later. We were arguing about something small, who forgot to take the trash out, I think, when he suddenly blurted out, "Maybe you should just go back to the States if you're so unhappy here." He said it like it was an empty threat, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. For the first time, I realized he wasn't fighting for me. He wasn't fighting for us. He was just trying to win. That night, I sat down and wrote out 2 lists, one for staying and one for leaving. On the stay side, I had things like baby grows up with both parents and I still love him even if I don't like him right now. On the leave side, I had regained my peace, set a better example for my child, and stopped feeling trapped. The leave side was longer. I haven't made a final decision yet, but I've started preparing. I've contacted a lawyer to understand my options and reached out to my family for support. They've been incredible, offering to help me with housing and childcare if I come back. I still don't know what I'll do, but I'm done pretending things are fine. Whether I stay or go, I need to be strong, for me and for my baby. Update 2. Things escalated, but not in the way I expected. After my last update, I committed to focusing on myself and figuring out what I needed, whether I stayed or left. I didn't plan to rush anything. I wanted to be sure I wasn't making decisions out of pure frustration. But life has a way of pushing you faster than you're ready to go. A few days after I started looking into my options, my husband dropped a bomb on me. Out of nowhere, during a seemingly normal dinner, he asked, "Do you even love me anymore?" It wasn't angry or accusatory. It was just flat. I froze. I didn't know what to say because, honestly, I wasn't sure of the answer myself. I didn't want to hurt him, but I also couldn't lie. So, I told him the truth. I love who we used to be. I love what we've built. But right now, I don't feel like I'm in love with you. The look on his face was a mix of shock and sadness. He asked if I was planning to leave him. I told him I didn't know yet, but that I couldn't keep living like this. He stayed quiet for a while, then muttered something about how I was giving up and throwing away our family. I didn't engage. I've learned that arguing in circles doesn't help, and I wasn't going to be guilt-tripped into silence anymore. The next morning, he started acting weird, overly attentive, asking what I needed help with, making jokes to lighten the mood. It felt so out of character that I didn't trust it. And I was right not to. By lunchtime, he was back to his old ways, muttering under his breath about how nothing is ever good enough and asking sarcastically if I needed him to scrub the floors too. It was exhausting. But then, something unexpected happened. A few nights later, we got into another argument, this time about money. I told him I was still working the remote job, and he went off about how I was acting like I didn't trust him to provide for us. I explained, again, that the job wasn't about money. It was about me having something for myself. He didn't get it. He said I was making things more complicated than they needed to be. That's when I lost it. I told him he didn't respect me, didn't see me as an equal, and that I was tired of feeling like a single parent in my own marriage. I said if he wasn't willing to actually listen to me, we needed to stop pretending this relationship was working. His response? Fine. If you want to leave, go ahead. But don't expect me to fight for you. I swear, something inside me snapped. I told him that was the saddest thing I'd ever heard and that he was proving my point. I said, if you don't care enough to fight for this, why should I? He didn't answer. He just walked out of the room. I spent the next day in a fog, trying to wrap my head around everything. That night, I started packing a bag, not to leave immediately, but just to feel like I had some control over my life. When he saw the bag, he panicked. For the first time in forever, I saw real fear in his eyes. He asked if I was taking the baby and leaving. I told him I wasn't sure yet, but I needed to be ready for anything. That's when he broke down. Like, full-on sobbing. I'd never seen him cry like that, not even when his dad passed away. He kept saying, I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family. It was heartbreaking, but also frustrating because it felt like too little, too late. I told him that if he really meant it, he needed to prove it, not with words, but with actions. The next week was complicated. He started trying, but it was like walking on eggshells. Every time he helped out, he'd overdo it, like he was trying to make up for years of neglect in a single day. He also kept apologizing for things I hadn't even brought up, which felt performative rather than genuine. I told him I appreciated the effort but that consistency mattered more than grand gestures. Meanwhile, I kept working on my own plans. I opened a savings account in my name and started putting money aside. I also contacted a lawyer to understand the logistics of a divorce while living overseas. The lawyer was helpful but blunt. Leaving wouldn't be easy, especially since my husband is military. Custody arrangements could get messy, and the process could drag on for months. It was daunting, but it also solidified my resolve. Around this time, my husband asked if we could try couples therapy. I was hesitant because, honestly, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to salvage the marriage. But I agreed, mostly for the sake of closure. Our first session was awkward. He spent half the time listing all the things he thought he was doing right and the other half complaining that I didn't appreciate him. The therapist, bless her, shut that down quickly. She pointed out that his help came with strings attached and that his defensiveness was a barrier to real communication. By the end of the session, he was quieter than I'd ever seen him. On the way home, he apologized for how he treated me. It felt sincere, but I didn't let my guard down completely. I've been burned too many times before. Over the next few weeks, things slowly started to change. He stopped making snide comments when he helped around the house. He started taking initiative without being asked. He even began putting the baby to bed a few nights a week so I could have some time to myself. It was a relief, but it also left me feeling conflicted. Why did it take me threatening to leave for him to step up? I talked about it with my therapist, who said it was normal to feel wary after years of feeling unsupported. She told me to focus on whether his changes felt sustainable or like temporary damage control. So far, it's been a mix. He's definitely trying, but there are moments where his old habits creep back in. The other day, he snapped at me for not folding his laundry the right way, and it brought everything flooding back. I told him I wasn't his maid, and if he didn't like how I did it, he could do it himself. To my surprise, he actually apologized and started folding it himself. I wish I could say everything is fixed, but it's not. I'm still tired. I'm still unsure if I can fully trust him to be the partner I need. But for now, I'm taking it one day at a time. I'm still saving money, still keeping my options open, and still putting myself first for the first time in years. No matter what happens, I'm proud of myself for finally standing up for what I deserve. Whether I stay or leave, I know I'll be okay, and so will my baby. Update 3. It's been a whirlwind few months, and I've finally reached a point where I can say I know what I want. Things have unfolded in ways I didn't fully anticipate, but one thing is clear: I'm done living in a cycle of frustration, half measures, and unfulfilled promises. After my last update, I gave my husband more time than I probably should have to prove he was serious about changing. For a while, he was consistent. He kept helping around the house, showing up for our child in ways he never had before, and even started opening up during therapy. I'll admit, it gave me hope. I wanted to believe we could rebuild something that felt shattered. But deep down, there was always this voice telling me to stay cautious. Then came the turning point. It wasn't a big, dramatic event, just a quiet moment of clarity. I was putting our baby to bed after a long day, and as I rocked her to sleep, I realized how much of myself I'd lost trying to hold this marriage together. I thought about all the times I'd put his needs above mine, all the resentment I'd swallowed, and all the times I'd convinced myself things would get better if I just tried harder. That night, I finally admitted to myself that I didn't want to keep fighting for something that had drained me for so long. The next morning, I told him. I sat him down and said, "I've thought about this a lot, and I don't think I can keep doing this. I think we need to separate." He looked at me like I'd just slapped him. At first, he didn't say anything, and then he started asking if this was because of something he'd done recently. I told him it wasn't about one thing, it was about years of feeling unsupported, unseen, and taken for granted. He got defensive, which I'd expected. He said, "But I've been trying. You can't deny that I've changed." And he's not wrong, he did change. But the problem was, it came too late. I told him that I appreciated the effort he'd been making, but it didn't erase all the years of feeling like I was in this alone. I said, "It shouldn't have taken me threatening to leave for you to care enough to change." That's when he got quiet. He stared at the floor for what felt like forever, and when he finally looked up, he said, "I thought we were doing better." I told him I'd tried to believe that too, but my heart just wasn't in it anymore. It was the hardest conversation I've ever had, but I knew it was necessary. The next few weeks were complicated. We agreed to stay in the same house while we figured out the logistics, which was awkward, to say the least. He went back and forth between being overly accommodating and completely shutting down. One day, he'd be asking if I needed help with anything, and the next, he'd be sulking in silence. It was exhausting, but I kept reminding myself that this was temporary. I contacted the lawyer again to start the divorce process officially. Because we're overseas, it's a bit messier than it would be back in the States, but I was prepared for that. The lawyer was incredibly helpful in laying out my options and reassuring me that I wasn't trapped, no matter how complicated things seemed. My biggest concern, of course, was our baby. I knew this would be a huge adjustment for her, and I worried about how my husband's all-or-nothing attitude toward parenting would play out. When I brought up custody arrangements, he said, "I told you before, I'm not doing this halfway. If you want to raise her without me, fine. But don't expect me to be a part-time dad." Hearing him say that out loud broke my heart. I told him he was being selfish and unfair, not just to me, but to our child. I said, "You don't get to punish her because our marriage didn't work out." He didn't have much of a response, and I realized that, as much as I wanted to change his mindset, I couldn't force him to be the father she deserves. So, I stopped trying. I focused on what I could control, making plans for myself and my baby. I started looking into moving back to the States near my family, where I'd have a support system. My mom and sister were thrilled at the idea of us coming home, and knowing they'd be there to help made the decision feel less overwhelming. The last big hurdle was figuring out how to tell my husband that I was officially leaving. Even though we'd been living as roommates for weeks, saying the words felt daunting. I waited until after our baby was asleep one night, then sat him down again. I told him I'd started making plans to move back home and asked if he wanted to be involved in the process of figuring out custody. His reaction was mixed. At first, he was angry, saying I was taking his family away. I reminded him that this wasn't a sudden decision, that I'd been honest with him about how I felt for months. He calmed down eventually and asked what I needed from him to make the move easier. It was the most productive conversation we'd had in years, which was ironic, given the circumstances. In the end, we agreed that I'd take our daughter back to the States, at least for now. He said he needed time to figure things out and decide what kind of role he wanted to play in her life. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but I accepted it. I told him the door would always be open for him to be a part of her life, but that I wouldn't wait around for him to make up his mind. The move itself was chaotic, as expected, but we made it. My family has been amazing, helping me settle in and adjust to this new chapter. It's been strange being back after so many years away, but it also feels right. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe. As for my husband, we've kept communication open, but it's been minimal. He checks in occasionally to ask how our daughter is doing, but he hasn't made any concrete plans to visit or be more involved. I'm still holding out hope that he'll step up eventually, but I'm also preparing myself for the possibility that he won't. The most surprising thing has been how quickly I've started to feel like myself again. I didn't realize how much of my identity had been wrapped up in being his wife and trying to keep our marriage afloat. Now that I'm on my own, I'm rediscovering parts of myself that I thought were gone forever. It's been empowering and liberating in ways I can't fully put into words. I won't lie and say everything is perfect. It's not. Being a single mom is hard, and there are days when I feel completely overwhelmed. But even on the hardest days, I don't regret my decision. I know I made the right choice for me and my daughter, and that's all that matters. To anyone reading this who's in a similar situation, trust yourself. It's scary to make big changes, but staying in a situation that's slowly draining you is scarier. You deserve to be happy, and you deserve a partner who supports and values you. And if you don't have that, it's okay to walk away. Thank you to everyone who shared advice, support, and even tough love. It meant more to me than I can express. This is the end of my story, for now.